Welcome to the Long Range Pursuit Podcast, presented by Gunwerks, where we learn about and share long-range shooting techniques, science, and gear.
All right, guys, I'm trying a new format for this podcast. I do a lot better when I'm talking to somebody in the room, kind of communicate, so we'll give this a try. It might take a few sessions to get the hang of it. So, going to keep this short, try to keep these sessions from my desk pretty short, try to pick out a good, solid topic, maybe answer some questions that come up with everybody. The one thing that I think the theme that I'm going to pick to work on for a while is the idea that I believe as an industry and a sport in this long-range shooting, long-range hunting specifically, that we need to take our sport a little bit more seriously and take a little bit different approach in our systems and training and our efforts to, essentially achieve that perfect shot when the moment of truth comes. And so here's the background. So I literally spent almost 8 hours yesterday doing a end of course check ride for my private pilot exam, and it's given me a really interesting experience to to put together as a background for training and trying to achieve something that's that's fairly difficult, that has potential bad outcomes if you don't perform as well. And so I've been pondering, obviously comparing, training for, learning how to fly and training for learning how to shoot all along the way, comparing our program to the program I was going through, a little bit of a self-taught curriculum. And so very similar to how we do our shooting. It's most of the time it's self-taught or self-learned. One thing that I was really impressed with was the structure that was there in the aviation world for, doing your ground, kind of doing your proficiency tests, so to speak, when you're flying. And, kind of looking at the way we approach our training. So we've been doing Long Range University since 2007. So we've been doing a long-range hunting-based training program for almost 2 decades. I do believe that we have the longest-running, one of the oldest programs that exist. And over the years, I think we've developed, the curriculum and redeveloped the curriculum and, focused more and more on certain things that we felt were important. And I for today's, from the desk session, I want to talk a little bit about, how maybe we could, solidify or make more significant our training efforts to become proficient and maybe beyond proficient in our rifleman skills and capabilities. And so one of the things that I have here on my notes was the thought that this rifleman skill is something that you develop, this canny ability to, just pick out a target and shoot at it, or that, somehow you're either a great shot or you're not, and it's not something that can be systematically attained. I can't tell you how many times I've had discussions with people at trade shows or events or, wherever it is that kind of turn into, well, I don't need all that fancy stuff. I remember, it wasn't that long ago, guys were telling me how they didn't need a rangefinder to shoot 700 yards, and that they just knew where their rifle, hit. And I think, if we would have scored some first shot hits, it would have kind of put everything in perspective, I think, really quickly. But this idea that a rifleman has this inherent, uncanny ability to just hit a target, I feel is actually detrimental to this concept that I would like to put out there, which is everybody through the right training steps, curriculum, etc., can achieve the next level of capability and proficiency. And, like aviation, I think you look at shooting, one of the reasons why it's so intriguing and so exciting and we actually embark on this is because there's no limit to how far we can take it or what we can achieve. So you can always get just a little bit better. You can attain a little more proficiency or skill set or improve your equipment and so effectively extend your capabilities and performance. So a couple things I want to share here. Let's talk equipment skills. I think we can pretty much render, our ability to put that bullet where we want it to be is there's equipment over here, and then there's, our capabilities over here. And as I was kind of breaking down, just a few things that I wanted to point out, try to get everybody re-energized into, more learning, continuing education, more skills development, is let's talk just a little bit about equipment side and, share a couple things. I feel we do this thing at Gunwerks where we send a rifle ready to go out of the box. So we say 1,000 yards out of the box. That's our trademark slogan. And sometimes people take that a little too literally. They believe that the gun is zeroed perfectly and dialed and everything is ready to go. And I hear these stories, and when they work out great, they're great, where they pull it out of the box and they shoot an animal at 800 yards and it was all great. That freaks me out a little bit. When I go hunting, the last thing that I want to have happen is a failure that was caused by equipment, because I have enough shortcomings in my abilities that I don't need anything adding to that. So I put an extreme focus on really knowing my rifle, knowing that my zero is correct. And you would be surprised at, how difficult that the concept of, say, like one of these non-raising turrets is to zero. So knowing how to zero your rifle and be very, very comfortable with adjusting the zero and manipulating your ballistics to accommodate that adjustment in zero, those are super important skills as a rifleman. And it seems really basic, but if you change your zero, does that affect your zero angle calculation in your Revic ballistic app profile? The answer is that it depends. And you as a shooter probably should know how to do that. You should understand the zero angle methodology of calculating ballistics. That's really important because it accounts for initial conditions. How many people listening to this podcast, I wish I had a old Scott Adams scroll going and we were doing this live so I could get some responses. But how many people know what the cold shot performance behaviors are for their rifle, and not just cold bore performance, but clean versus dirty? I think that's another one that's really interesting. And a lot of times important to know, because if you ever have to clean your gun on a trip and maybe aren't able to shoot a fouling shot, what are you going to do? So there are a lot of scenarios there that we can outline, but so cold bore performance, zero adjustment. Last one that I think is really, really important as a skills development in, understanding our equipment is, do you understand the concept of a ballistic trajectory, a ballistic profile, the shape of the curve that bullet makes as the earth pulls it to the ground and the air and wind, slow it down? That shape's really important, and understanding how, like a ballistic turret, or a ballistic profile, how that shape is this theoretical condition, and what your bullet actually does is your performance. So now you've got this calculated versus actual. And it's imperative as a long-range hunter and shooter to be able to make those two things match. So we call that truing. And it's a process that we do here when we set up a rifle. But the challenge is the minute you change, an ammunition lot, the minute that, you shoot X number of rounds and your bore condition starts to foul, your velocities start to change, or you've shot enough rounds down your pipe that your overall velocity changes, whether it's clean or dirty. It's like it changes. You get another lot of bullets, the dies have worn differently, and now all of a sudden the BC is slightly different. How do you, as a shooter, accommodate those factors? A real sneaky one that, the Brian Litz's tall target test has really helped a lot of people understand, but it kind of gets lost, I feel, in this discussion of truing, is understanding your actual click values of your rifle scope. And a lot of people say, oh, yeah, well, I'm shooting, brand X or brand Y. They're great. I don't have to worry about it. But the truth is, every brand, every product that's made has some manufacturing tolerances, some, optical tolerance, and your click value will not be precise. I promise you, that most scopes, the majority of scopes, will have a click value that is not the actual click value. So understanding your elevation adjustment factor or click value so that you can properly true your velocity or your ballistic coefficient. Super, super important. Not crazy, high level thoughts. I mean, there's some real simple steps we can do. You don't have to be a ballistic scientist to be able to do that. Our first class, level 1, Gunwerks, essentially is that right there. It's like how to true your rifle, how to, set it up, zero it, getting familiar with your adjustments, equipment, all that stuff, and understanding how to use a ballistics program. And so you get a lot of classroom time to do that. I think it's super important to be able to manage those items. But those would be the first three big ones. The last one is very interesting, which is, are you capable enough and knowledgeable enough in your familiarity with your equipment, your experience, using the equipment? Are you capable enough that when something happens that you're able to troubleshoot it? And this is the next level of skill. So you got this first level of skill that I outlined with those three things. This is that next level of skill, and it does require somebody to gain experience through overcoming challenges and understanding your system enough that you can logically eliminate, different issues. If here's a good example. You're on a hunt and you're going to check your gun before you go out, and there's a rock or a target or something at, say, 700 yards you shoot at. And you take a couple shots at that target and looks like the trend is a minute low, and you shoot again and again. And your average group is about a minute lower than what you're looking at. We're using the reticle to measure. And the potential shot on this hunt is 700 yards in distance. So you kind of need to get this fixed. My question would be, do you know how to tell whether that needs you to adjust your turret up a minute and then slip the turret and reset it? Or do you need to adjust your ballistics and accommodate it that way? Or what other reason could you have that shot that is a minute low at 700 yards? And I think developing the skill level to logically, systematically approach a troubleshooting scenario, I am guilty 100% of being very busy and having a lot of faith and trust that the products that we output are ready to rock and roll. I have embarked on so many hunts where I grab a gun right off the production line and go. And on one hand, that's great, but there's been cases where, okay, we got to get a zero done. I remember one trip with my boys to Africa. Um, I don't know why. Derek's one of my favorite people in the whole world, my son Derek. He's been around this industry and this business since he was, 10 years old. Like, I remember taking him on shooting school trips when he was 12, and he's worked for me for quite a few years here at Gunwerks. Very knowledgeable, awesome. This was, 4 or 5 years ago, and he didn't like the way the front base was mounted on the rifle. And so he took the scope off and he turned the base around and put the scope back on. And we went to Africa and we were shooting this gun, and you can only take 100 rounds or so with you. So we were shooting the gun, and every once in a while we'd get this weird miss, and then we'd go shoot and just like try to diagnose it, and everything's working good. And then it would come apart, and then we'd diagnose it and it would come apart. Well, on hindsight, it's easy to understand. He didn't get that base tightened up correctly, and so we had this shifting, scope mount that plagued us that whole trip. And there was some extreme frustration. But we use that as a cliche, talking about getting ready for the next event. Is you don't pull a Derek, it would be bad. But sorry about that, Derek. I just had to share. Building confidence in your gun and proving its performance is, I think, one of the greatest confidence builders that you can have as a shooter, preparing for a hunting trip, and, planning to put the time into that and developing that specific set of skills that I outlined so that, when you do run into problems, you've got a toolbox. You go look at the whole other side of the spectrum and you start talking about your skills as a shooter. It's very easy to get stuck on a range and to drop bullets on steel and have a lot of fun. But, what about a prone position? Do you know how much your point of impact changes if you use your ARCA mount and lock it into a tripod? It's not a small amount. And there's very specific shooting techniques that you need to apply to get reasonable performance out of that. Do you understand that your 6.5 Creedmoor that you do a lot of shooting and plinking with for training does not react the same way as your 7 PRC that you're going to go hunting with? The differences in recoil and the forces that get imparted to your systems create different reactions. You do a 6.5 Creedmoor in a 14-pound gun or one of the smaller PRS type cartridges and a even 20-pound gun. Like, those techniques that you learn there have nothing to do with shooting a 7.5-pound 7 PRC at 850 yards with wind conditions after you ran up a hill. Like, that gun behaves differently, and the techniques you need to develop are different. So I would propose, that as shooters, we're learning our gun, we're learning our techniques and process. So do you know what your gun does? Do you know how it reacts? Do you know how to read wind and shoot in wind conditions? Your range, like our training range, you get like 2 or 3 wind conditions and you start learning some indicators, and then really quickly you've got this, okay, that's this wind, apply this correction, go. You get somewhere else and it's completely different, different vegetation, terrain, different behaviors, and it's completely different scenario. So are you challenging yourself to learning from new experiences in that? So shooting in conditions. Can you set up in an odd position in a hurry and get a shot off? I feel that I've been on many dozens of hunts where the difference between success and failure on an animal is just seconds. 5 to 10 seconds. That's all it took between, not ever having that opportunity or harvesting an awesome trophy with a great shot. So, and not all those positions are perfectly prone with a bag and everything's calm and collected. A lot of them are really hurried. So that's important. I think one of the best things that I've gotten from Africa hunting, besides a bunch of really cool friends and acquaintances down there, is significant quantities of setup and execution under stressful hunting type duress. And I think that repetition. Now, it took me a lot of landings to finally figure that out. So maybe I'm just a slow learner, but I do feel like that repetition is very valuable. And I think it's why we've had such a success, doing hosted hunts in Africa, is because of the opportunities for shooting that creates for people. I mean, you can do a decade's worth of long-range hunting experience in a week. It's a pretty good program for guys that want to continue that development. Lots of things on the personal side. I do feel like skills development is a key aspect of long range hunting and our ability to do it. One of the I just wanted to bring up ammo for a minute. It's been such a sore subject this last couple of years with the unavailability of the correct powders and components to do what we've always done, which is make really consistent high-performing ammo. And so I think we've reached a stable point again, but it's really identified the need to be able to monitor your ammo's performance and, buy bigger lots of ammo and be prepared to make adjustments as things change. I think that new Garmin chronograph is going to be absolutely awesome because of your ability to put it in your rifle case and keep it with you all the time, and the ability to shoot and get point of impact and velocity information at the same time, so you're not consuming ammo unnecessarily. So I think that's a great accessory to monitor ammunition and ammunition performance. I think a lot of times we can spend on equipment and get results that help us become more capable and more efficient people, and that I think that Garmin's a good example of that. Maybe talk a little bit about consequences. So one of the things that I've got sucked into, and I don't know, you look at the wrong thing on Instagram or Facebook, and all of a sudden that's all you see. And in my case, it wasn't thirst traps and women. It was aviation crash reports and stuff like that. So I've been following a lot of the mistakes that get made that result in accidents, and it doesn't take a lot. And looking at the way that develops and the decision matrices, the decision history on an accident, and I start thinking, okay, back to comparing to shooting and hunting, and for the last, it's been 15 years when I go on a hunt, like I'm trying to produce content. Like we used to do the show Best of the West when we started that. And then in 2010, we started Long Range Pursuit, and we've been doing that ever since. So that's almost 15 years of Long Range Pursuit. So every hunt, whether I took my kids up in the mountains and we were hunting elk, DIY, or we're flying over to Africa and hunting with our good friends at John X Safaris, like those trips always were work for us, and there was always a camera rolling when we're shooting. And I remember early days, the idea was always, okay, we want to demonstrate like how this is supposed to go. I remember we would cut a shot out that missed, or or cut out a follow-up if it was just to clean up. And after some time, I realized that actually wasn't providing the best, learning educational environment. And so about almost a decade ago, we said, all right, we're going to show all of it so that we can effectively demonstrate, what happens, how you should react. And that way gives you a little bit more confidence in, the capabilities. I know that in the long range hunting world, there's always these criticisms about how all these animals get wounded. And I almost felt like showing all of the shots that you take would help build people's confidence that that's not really the case. You're not really, just showing the good stuff, you're showing everything. So we do show a lot of those, and showing people how to aim so that their misses have low impact, showing people how to find their maximum effective range for their cartridge and also for themselves. I think those are really important. But the part that's significant about hunting with a camera rolling is that it imparts a whole nother element of pressure. If we really, adopt, and you almost have to do this on purpose, otherwise I think we have a tendency to get desensitized. You have to adopt an attitude of I guess connecting your efforts and performance to some type of a standard, whether you want to think of it as a moral standard or ethical standard. When we're taking an animal's life, when we're harvesting an animal, there's an aspect of that is, I think, a lot more significant than sometimes we put weight to. And just like crashing an airplane is a bad outcome, I think making a bad shot and causing undue suffering or wounding an animal without recovery, I think it is absolutely terrible. And I think we should consider it that, and then we should take appropriate actions to try to minimize the risk of that happening. And so that's back to, okay, equipment, skills development, et cetera. Even the things like understanding terminal performance, understanding how cartridges work, bullets work, understanding something that's a little bit harder to picture, which is hit probability, and kind of grasping what that means, and being able to kind of set your personal minimums before you embark on that hunt. If you're uncomfortable shooting in 15-mile-an-hour winds at 1,000 yards, then what is the limit? What is the maximum? I actually would say a 15-mile-an-hour variable winds at 1,000 yards is an extremely difficult shot in a lot of scenarios. So, do we pull that back in? Do we derate that? And how do you set that up so that when you go out into the field, you're not faced with that in the moment, ethical dilemma of, well, I maybe have never taken this shot before, but I think I have a chance of hitting it if, everything goes right. We don't want to be that person. So I think, the aviation thing for a new pilot like myself, like that has been stressed, is what's your personal minimums? What are you willing to fly in? What conditions that, and you kind of create a contract before you even go out. That way you're not, pressured or flexible in your approach. I think we should be doing the same thing with rifles. I think what it really comes down to is what are you capable of what are you capable of doing when the pressure's on, like the camera, where your performance is going to be graded and judged, and you or your guide, you might be the only ones that are there to do that, but still it's there. All right, so enough of that. Let's move on to this concept of skills development. And I just wanted to point out that there's a lot of opportunities to go do training where, maybe there's a target set up and you get to shoot these really extreme ranges out to 2,000 yards, and maybe you're not quite getting the full benefit of what that training can do for you, what that dollar spend that you made in your time and efforts can do. We have been very, very careful to try to meticulously improve and craft and curate our training curriculum, and I see it affecting and benefiting everyone, because it just ends up disseminating everywhere. I mean, I can stick my finger on 3 or 4 different long-range training programs that, essentially stemmed from ours. I do see a lot of competitive likeness. Anytime you see like a level 1, level 2 type program, that came from us. You go look at the curriculum, the points that they're covering are going to match what we're advertising online. I will tell you that the science-based approach that we take in our curriculum is very significant. The progressive learning experience, the ability to achieve a layer of knowledge and skill, and then to add to that at the right time. We take that very, very seriously. I only bring this up to point out that if you're going to embark on becoming more proficient in your long-range shooting, and I'm talking about hunting, I feel it's really, really important to be deliberate in your approach to training and skills development and the acquisition of knowledge and your capabilities. So if you take that approach where you're like, hey, look, this is exactly what the outcome that I'm looking for. I want to be able to achieve this and achieve this. What is the best way to do that? So going to the right source of authority, applying the right deliberate curriculums or activities to make sure that you can achieve that skill. And then, probably until, one of us really steps up and sets the tone for the industry, you kind of have to develop a system for you to judge on your own, your ability to achieve that objective. And that's an area of focus for me. I haven't been able to make progress. I've been wanting to do that for several years, but I do think developing your own mechanism to gauge your capabilities and performance and to be confident, not just your equipment, but also your skill sets. I think that is a fundamental aspect. So setting kind of your limitations and kind of your personal minimum, so to speak, and then developing a mechanism or routine that allows you to gauge your effectiveness, against those minimums, and then also against, what some of your goals are to achieve. So going sheep hunting, you don't really need to be able to shoot 800 yards because you need to be able to make sure it's a legal sheep. But if you're in Africa hunting plains game or elk up here in the Rocky Mountain West, sometimes 1,000-yard shot is absolutely a possibility and can be something we can all achieve, with the right conditions and setup. So just want to challenge everybody, get deliberate about your training, get serious, take very seriously the idea of sending lead at an animal and how important it is to be effective and to always strive for that perfect shot. And I think this series that we're going to do here from the desk for a while is going to be focused on some topics that are related to this. Thanks for joining.
If you like what you're hearing here, please take a second and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. We appreciate your feedback and suggestions for topics you'd like discussed or questions you want answered on the podcast. You can reach out on Facebook or Instagram or send us an email to podcast@gunwerks.com. Also, be sure and check out our full offering of long-range gear at gunwerks.com. Use promo code LRP for free shipping on any order.